He says that a design system is a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Notes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Anton, a seasoned designer and accomplished writer who specializes in designing superior user-centric experiences. With a rich tapestry of 25 years in the industry, he has collaborated with global giants such as IKEA, Spotify, Google, Loom, and numerous others, leaving an indelible mark on their user experiences. In this episode, Anton had shared great insights on design systems. We had started the episode by exploring what are design systems and what are some of the most common challenges or roadblocks that organizations face when implementing a design system and how can they overcome them. Then we spoke on the approach towards designing and documenting a design system, and Anton had shared some of the best practices with us. Later then we spoke on how can standardization and creative freedom be balanced when implementing a design system, and how could designers from various disciplines be involved in developing and maintaining a design system, and how to approach our design system's governance and version control to ensure consistency and integrity. We then concluded the show by how to measure the effectiveness of a design system and what are the different metrics and KPIs involved to track the effectiveness of a design system, and Anton's take on future of design systems evolving with the rise of AI. Join us every week as we delve into the design world, hearing from visionary leaders who shape our lives and inspire our future. We uncover the stories, inspirations, and insights of design luminaries at the forefront of innovation. Thank you, and until the next time, may your dreams be inspired by brilliance of design. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Notes of Design. In this episode, we have a very special guest with us. Hi Anton, welcome to Notes of Design.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
So how was your day so far, Anton?
It's really good. It's summer in Sweden, so the best season of the year.
That's wonderful. If you could give a brief about yourself to our audience out there.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Anton. I live in the south of Sweden. I've been working with digital media for almost 25 years, but I would say that it's within the last 10, 12 years that I worked as a consultant that I've really started to sort of find my niche, I guess. I'm currently consulting for primarily one startup called Summer Health. Essentially, it's a telehealth company. They help parents with newborn kids, just taking away some of that anxiety and stress that you might have as a parent to a newborn, especially first-time parents. So I've really found it, validating and inspiring to be able to work with a digital product that actually aims to do good as well after years of doing work that might have more of a financial impact than perhaps a social impact.
That's wonderful, Anton. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? What are your tips to the beginners in starting the design journey?
Yeah, so I actually started, this was, to give you some context, this was late 90s, so probably around 97. During that time, I was kind of heavily involved in the music scene, so played in bands, went to a lot of shows, and at this time I started designing fanzines, record sleeves, basically everything that was related to that kind of music scene. So it was really something that was born out of a passion more than sort of the idea to have a career within it. And so I got to know Photoshop. During one summer, I got an internship at a local advertisement agencies. Again, this was late 90s, not that much digital stuff happening anywhere really. But they had a client that was sort of starting to understand the potentials of the internet more, and they wanted a website. So no one at the ad agency knew anything about digital, but they sort of had seen that I had played around with stuff a bit. So that made me then design and sort of code the very first website. I think this was 97. A couple of years later, I was more involved in the sort of digital design scene. Again, this was a very, very young industry at the time, but I noticed that all of the sites that I thought were amazing at the time were all made by students at this school called Hyper Island in the south of Sweden. I was not very familiar with the school prior to that, but started to find out more and more about the school. And eventually, as I was ready, applied, got accepted. And I think that was definitely sort of the beginning of my design journey as well. And I think more importantly, what Hyper Island taught me is both sort of the value of network. It's not actually a very practical school, but it's a school that is very much highlighting all of sort of the more softer things that are just as useful. So how do you work efficiently together in teams? How do you give feedback? How do you take feedback? And I think that was a very, very valuable lesson for me beginning on. To wrap it up, I'd say after Hyper Island, I spent almost 10 years working for agencies in Stockholm, in London, in Copenhagen, both sort of on the digital side, but also on the more traditional side, but always with a very clear focus on digital. And I think that was valuable for me, at least, to see what it's like working at an agency, see what it's like working at a small agency, at a large network agency. And then after that, taking the step into sort of founding my own practice. And now I really enjoy working as a sort of consultant, even though I tend to stay on projects for longer times, but there's just something to me that's valuable, sort of noting that I am really my own boss. So to head over to the second part of your question, sort of tips for beginners, I would say that it is the most important thing is really just to get started. As with anything, I find that it's far more valuable to sort of start, adapt, iterate, than to think that you can sort of set a plan and plan everything and that will lead to success. So whether it's, coding, visual design, UX design, product design, whatever sort of aspect of this industry that you're aiming for, I think the best thing is just to get started. Like most things, you will be not great in the beginning. I think that was more recently, that has been something that I can really relate to as well. As I've been writing for the past, 8 years, and in the beginning, I was not a great writer. I would still not call myself a great writer, but at least I am better. And I think that is, whether it's writing, whether it's design, whether it is, running or playing the piano, you will not necessarily be great when you start, but you will get better regardless of what it is.
Thank you so much, Anton, for sharing such inspirational journey. So let's begin today's episode on design systems. So can you briefly explain what is a design system?
Yes. So explaining what a design system actually is, I found that it is the kind of thing that is, I guess, typical of our industry as well, that if you ask, 10 designers what a design system is, you'll probably get 11 different answers. So, but I have 2 quotes that I think highlight some of the aspects that I consider when talking about the design system. So the first point is from a designer, Marco Suarez. He says that a design system is a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. The second one is from Alla Kolmatova, and it says that a design system is a set of connected patterns and shared practices, coherently organized. So what I think is valuable to sort of identify within these quotes is that it is, I think often we think about design systems as a library of components, But I think more than that, it is actually patterns. So a pattern might be something that is a little bit more than a component. So let's say it is an e-commerce site, then the fields where you enter your credit card information, like that entire thing might be a pattern, for instance. So it is a little bit bigger, but it highlights how not just the components itself, but actually how to use the components as part of something bigger.
Thank you, Anton. So what are some of the common challenges or roadblocks that organizations face when implementing a design system, and how can they overcome it?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge is that a design system is not something that offers a return of investment instantly. It is something that you will gain value from only over time, but it's also something that is quite hard to quantify, like what the actual value is, especially in organizations where you tend to want to put a number. In most cases, that numbers is economic number. So you want to know in cash how much we're saving by using a design system. I think that is extremely hard to quantify. The only thing that you can see is that the team is working more efficiently and that the final product is more consistent and better set up for scale. So the challenge is get stakeholders get buy-in for a design system. I would say that the other thing is that a design system is very much a sort of chicken and egg situation where it is extremely hard to start by building the design system because you need to see how these components and patterns work in context. And so while you start by just designing a button, it is really hard to sort of evaluate how efficient that component is without seeing it in context. So ideally, you need to build the design system in parallel with the actual product. Now, in most cases, this is difficult just in terms of timing because most designers will spend their time on building the actual product. No one tends to focus on the design system. Building the design system once the product is fully designed is a challenge because you will have to go back and replace everything on every design screen. So that is obviously a challenge as well. I would say the only solution to that is to try to build it in parallel as much as possible and be aware of the fact that it will feel like you're creating extra work for yourself that maybe doesn't give you the sort of payback that you were expecting, but just have faith that it will in the end. And I'd say related to that is that one of the challenges that I've seen is that while you tend to have clear ownership when it comes to product, when it comes to design system, there's usually not a clear owner unless you're a very big organization. They tend to have teams working on just the design system, which is arguably ironic since the teams that actually benefit the most from clear design systems, I would say, are mid-sized startups that actually have that pace that they can move fast, but they just don't have that system in place. So I think those are some of the challenges, but as you can hear, there are solutions to all of them as well.
Thank you, Anton. So how do you approach designing and documenting a design system? What do you think are some of the best practices?
Yeah, so I would say for designing a design system, one of the things that I always try to highlight when working with teams on their design systems. So most recently, for instance, I helped Lou design system, and one of the things that I really wanted to highlight within that process is I think it's really important to make a design system that is scalable and thoughtful. It should be clear. So we want to use, names that are explicit to users of that design system. So naming tokens and components in a way that it makes it clear how to use it. And I would say that it is actually better to make the design system as small as possible. I've found that a lot of organizations tend to want to build out these super big design systems that, they have different button types, and they have every color and every color shade possible, but they don't really offer any guidance to when to use what. So I don't consider that a design system. I think that is like a UI library. It is just not efficient. It is not necessarily scalable because you already have every possible combination that you might need. And it is not a tool for making a consistent experience. So I think it is important to design a design system and, first of all, consider what some of the guardrails for this project should be. I think if you compare a design system to, let's say, your calendar app, for instance, a calendar can be a highly effective tool, and it can allow for consistency and great efficiency even within teams. But that also requires, that everyone inputs their time in a consistent way into the calendar. If everyone just adds whatever, then it's not necessarily clear the benefits of a shared tool like that. So when designing a design system, I think it's really important to think about what you need now rather than sort of thinking about all the possible future scenarios. If the system is scalable, you can make like anything work when the time comes. I would say that, Figma is, if that is sort of tool that you choose to use, it's certainly the tool that I have most experience with. It is a fantastic tool of allowing you to build upon what you already have. And I think that is really important. Documenting a design system is obviously extremely important. I would also say that it is probably every designer's nightmare. But again, I would say that it's really just helpful to consider sort of what is the context, what's the purpose. Depending on the size of the team, I think a documentation for a design system that's used by a team of 1 to 5 designers can be very different from a design system used by hundreds or even thousands of designers, and not to mention non-designers. I think going back to that previous questions about what are the common challenges, to add to that, I would say one of the common challenges is that your design system is something that lives in Figma and in Figma alone. But in order for a design system to be sort of truly useful and helpful, it needs to really have a sort of 1-to-1 ratio to something that lives in code as well.
Thank you, Anton. So how can standardization and creative freedom be balanced when implementing a design system?
Yeah, I think this is a question that touches on something that is, probably every designer's concern regarding design systems, that it will limit their creativity. But as mentioned, I would say that the idea is really to sort of, work in parallel. You design something, we build components. You design something by updating components. It is a process, but just like designing anything, at some point you just need to sort of put the pen down and say, okay, this is what we got now. Let's work with this. Because I think any designer is aware of the fact that it is occasionally really hard to just stop and realize that, okay, it might not be perfect, but it is as good as it's going to get at this point. So I would say that, creative freedom isn't really bound by a design system, but more than A great designer should actually cherish a design system and use the building blocks to sort of create something amazing, and maybe use the building blocks to create something that was not necessarily how those building blocks were meant to be used. If you think about Lego, for instance, that's, I think, a great comparison where all of these building blocks they come with this idea of how to use them. But we've also seen these Lego hacks where people build the most amazing things. So creatives should really sort of try to embrace the box rather than sort of spending time thinking outside the box. They should embrace the box and make the most out of it. And I think in a way that is true creativity, to sort of be able to produce spectacular work with what you've got. And I think designers should have organized design system to create great experiences. If you think about I don't want to say any profession because I don't have that experience, but if you think about a lot of experience, really great work actually comes from order and structure. If you think about a really great chef, for instance, they have their mise en place, they have all of their ingredients completely lined up, and that's when they actually begin to prepare the dish. If you think about a surgeon, they have their scalpel and everything has their specific place where it should be, and that's when they can perform miracles. This really applies to a lot of professions, and I don't really see why the work of designers should be any different.
Thank you so much, Anton. So, Anton, how should stakeholders and designers from various disciplines be involved in developing and maintaining a design system? How do you approach a design system's governance and version control to ensure there's a consistency and integrity always being maintained?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And it is a question that a lot of organizations tend not to think about before creating a design system. I would say, first of all, it definitely depends on the team size as well. If you look at, summer health, for instance, it is essentially just me doing most of the design. So we don't really need governance in that sense. I am the gatekeeper of that design system. But with some of the sort of larger teams that I work with, again, I would say that it is just really important to have ownership. It could be either ownership for the entire design system, or you can even split it up so that, certain people have ownership over certain parts of that design system, and then just set a clear process for how do you add things to that design system. So one of the things that I've seen teams that have been valuable is that you set a different set of rights, essentially. So most people will be allowed to edit the design system, but only certain people will be allowed to add to the design system. And even perhaps a smaller group would be allowed to remove things from the design system. So that just sets some kind of process, I guess. Also, there is also in Figma the option to work with branches, which works similar to GitHub branches, where people can add to a branch, but it is then only certain people that can actually publish that branch and sort of push it out to everyone. So everyone can edit, add, delete, but only certain people can distribute those edits to everyone else. That obviously requires, that you have a process with that as well, so that not everyone has to sit and wait for new updates coming to the design system.
Thank you, Anton. So on the same note, how could design systems be made in flexibility also? For example, if there's a design system that's been used by 100 designers, but they have their own product goals. So for that, they have to tweak that design system. So how to make your design systems in a flexible way so that it caters for everyone?
Yeah, I would say that it is Well, first of all, I would say that a design system does not have to be one design system for everything. So even within a company, certain areas can have their separate versions of a design system. They can have a more extended design system. They can also just have, a separate design system. I think that is totally fine as well, and I think that it is extremely difficult to set a universal rule regarding the design systems that will sort of cater to each and every scenario that might occur.
Thank you, Anton. So, how to measure the effectiveness of a design system? Are there any metrics or KPIs that one can track?
I am sure that they are. I wouldn't say that there are any that I really have experience with. I would say a design system is more of a tool than an outcome in that sense. Again, I would say it is really about sort of making something more consistent and or sort of making sure that what you create is consistent across experiences. And I would say something like that might be very difficult to measure. Yeah, so I think that one thing that you could do is, especially for an organization that is introducing a design system, you can definitely do an internal review and talk to designers, both sort of on a efficiency note. So do they feel like they are able to work faster, work more efficiently, I would say, rather than faster? I think those are slight nuances. I would ask them if they are able to focus more on solving problems than, spending time just building the same things over and over. We've had a strong focus on designers so far, but I would say that those are questions that are actually really valuable for developers as well. Just making sure that they don't have to rebuild components over and over. They will just use that one thing. And then from a user's perspective, do people find that their product now is easier to use? Is it clearer how to use it because it is more consistent? I think those are some of the more sort of softer things that you could actually measure the benefits of a design system.
Thank you so much, Anton. So, how do you see the future of design system evolving with the rise of AI?
Yeah, I am still sort of not sure where I stand with AI in terms of design. I read a quote from a friend, Dan Mall, the other day. He said that he relies on AI to help him design more and design faster. He doesn't rely on AI to help him design better. And he definitely doesn't rely on AI to design for him or instead of it. I think that is a good sort of introduction to how I feel about design system and AI. I do think that AI will play a part. I definitely don't see them replacing designers anytime soon. But I do think that, AI will eventually help me with things like building out supporting component states, naming layers, which is, every designer's chore. Assure that the correct color tokens are used. I guess long-term, ultimately help me write documentation as well. Even just, minor things like spacing out distances and margins and paddings and all of that, like that, a generation of designers have had to do manually. I think those kind of asks is definitely something that we'll see AI helping us with.
Thank you, Anton, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, how does your day look like? Any interesting stories?
I'm not sure I have any interesting stories. I have a pretty, would say, basic life. Tend to get up around 8, have breakfast. I walk my dog, wake up my wife, and to go to the gym. Because I am based in Sweden, but primarily or only work with companies in the US, my mornings are really quiet. So I use everything up until noon to either just relax and spend time with, doing, especially this time of year, doing garden stuff, or I take that time to actually do like deep work because I know that no one that I work with will be on Slack. No one's going to send me any email. There's not going to be any meetings. I usually have meetings from 3 or 4 p.m. until 6, 7 p.m. and tend to do some additional work after that. Yeah, anything else? I don't think that is, I think that's a pretty good description of what my day look like. I would also say that, obviously my days are very different depending on most of my time. I spend at home. I live in the countryside. There's not much happening around. It's a very small town, about 900 people, and I work from home. But then occasionally I travel for work as well. So last week I was working together with Summer Health in New York, and so obviously those days are extremely different from the days that I have at home. But I think it's also those extremes that I really enjoy.
Thank you, Anton. So we'll conclude this show by your 3 favorite book recommendations and people who inspire you the most in this space.
Yes. So I appreciate getting this question in advance because otherwise I think my mind would just go blank. I'll start by 2 of the most recent books that I've read. So this year I've actually tried to read a little bit more. So I would say I've probably read 10 or 15 books this year. Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, I really enjoyed. I guess the title is pretty explanatory, but essentially it sort of talks about poverty in the US and just why it exists and perhaps also why it shouldn't have to exist. On a completely different note, as many other designers, I really enjoyed Creative Act by Rick Rubin. A brilliant producer, but also just a very interesting mind and mindset to anything creative. I kind of like not reading books that are, I've probably never read a book about design systems, and I tend to read books that perhaps isn't even about design. I would say that the books that the Basecamp guys, Jason and David wrote, it doesn't have to be crazy at work. Can't remember the title of the one about remote work. Maybe it was called just Remote. I really enjoyed those. It's been a long time, but I think that they're just as relevant today as when they launched. And finally, I would say the books that Mike Montero wrote. So Design is a Job, You're My Favorite Client, and Run by Science are all really good books for any designer. Yes. So people who inspire me, I would start off by saying Kevin Toy. He's a product designer for, startups, but he is, I admire his work a lot, and he is extremely talented, but even more so, he's just very humble and a very great guy. I would also say, so just people who do their thing, and it's not necessarily tied to a financial outcome. So last week, Apple released their Figma component library, but I think anyone who's ever tried to mock something up has been introduced to Joey Banks and his iOS Figma files, which he's been working on, for years, and they are just such high quality, and you can pay him for them, but you don't have to. So he's really just into sharing that work. I think a lot of the people, so who doesn't work at Figma anymore, but used to. But some of the guys still have Figma, is also just really good at, creating assets and sharing them. I would also say my friend Alan, we used to work together. He's a creative director, but he is now focusing more on his music career. And so I really get inspired by people that, even later in life can shift careers and just try something different. And I think that is really cool.
Thank you so much, Anton, for sharing all these wonderful recommendations with us. We are looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.